All right, welcome everybody. I'm Wes Warren. I'm here with Greg Stanley. We're with Whitehall Management. And today we're going to be talking about case acceptance, things that we've observed over the years of large producers, people that do get kind of outsized case acceptance. And Greg, I know you've been around and you've watched this. There are people out there that really have, I guess, some kind of magic. And the idea is to let you guys know what we've observed, the differences between offices and doctors. Greg, let's kick it off to you. Kind of what are things stand out in your mind as far as the differences between doctors?
Well, that's a good question. We don't just measure how big the case is. There's other things to consider.
Right.
The case gets big typically when they're getting, they start to get over 1,000 on the first visit. As it goes up, we see the patient sometimes not even return for the fitting, and they don't refer and they're gone. In other words, anybody can probably show a big case and get a few, but doing it in a way that keeps people in the practice and gets them to refer their friends feeling safe, that's quite an art.
Yeah, I would say that what we're describing here is kind of unusual, where you're getting large cases and a high percent, 70–80% of all of the new patients accept these quite larger treatment plans by comparison. And they go home excited about the practice and refer their husband, wife to the practice. That's kind of unusual to spend $3,000 or $4,000 and then go around telling everybody you got to go see my dentist.
It's funny that you say that, because when we see case presentation get high enough or case acceptance get big enough and people stay and they have a very high percentage of referrals, honestly, we kind of quietly start taking notes. We're learning from this person. Absolutely. Because they've mastered something nobody else seems to be able to do. And, you can even throw in a curveball there. If they're dealing with a lot of marketing patients and converting them into good referral sources, that's even harder.
Yeah, I would say that a common response from our doctors when they hear marketing patients, they spit and go, I hate them. I don't want them. They're junk, they're garbage. But we have offices that do well off of them. And we have these big producers that can still hit amazing numbers off of patients that everybody else doesn't even want.
Let's start out with the idea of what I call case acceptance calibration.
Okay. In
other words, it's based on outcomes. We'll talk about how they get there in a minute. But one outcome is people don't buy. They don't buy dentistry. I've seen this in a lot of prosthodontist offices where they just show one huge case after another brought in through their marketing, full mouth restorations and implants and so forth. They'll go 10 for 10, 20 for 20 with no sales. Nobody buys anything. And eventually they either go out of business or they get humbled to where they're showing a single tooth and kind of working their way up like everybody else does. So one of the first outcomes is no sales. First on the calibration that we look at is the person buys the dentistry.
Right.
But that's it. We don't see them again. They don't refer. Okay.
Can I make a comment? Because
yes.
I have offices that think they're doing good. And when we look at it, we'll look at, like, let's say January, for instance. This office, particular one, that had 90 new patients in January. And we wanted to see, and they did well off of those new patients, and just pretty good, nothing great, but did okay. And we wanted to see, how many of those patients showed up for their cleaning in June. And it was 0, none. They went 90 for 0. So you can think you've been doing good, but when you go back and look at your statistics and see how many of these new patients are actually staying in the practice, and we usually like to look at a year from when you've seen them first to see if they come back. A lot of times it's embarrassing. really low.
Well, you know, Wes, now that you mentioned that, sometimes we trace it back and find that the owner doctor has a very, very marginal staff and
Mhm.
knows that if he doesn't grab all the dentistry that passes through his chair, it's not going to be, you know, followed up on, it's not going to come back. And so he gets kind of grabby and pushes too hard and too big, and he gets a few, but he never sees the people again. So it's one of the outcomes and one of the causes. Okay, the second level. The second level is people buy the dentistry. They kind of have an affinity to the doctor or maybe some of the people in the practice. They like it there. Maybe does a good job with anesthesia or something. And the patient buys and returns, but never refers because he doesn't think people would like it here, doesn't think they can afford it, doesn't feel comfortable. You know, that's the thing. People may like a place a bit, but they're not comfortable putting their reputation on the line.
So how many referrals would you have to be in that zone where you're, and when I say referrals, patient to patient referrals, like if you're in the team.
Let me say this, four or five is not in that zone. 20 to 22 is kind of a national average. And we see people bringing in 20 to 30 referrals a month. And man, that's somebody that should be marketing because they impress people.
Right.
Stay with them, people tell others, time to spend the $150 and get a new patient in.
Right, okay. So
Okay, the third level, go ahead.
yeah, so if you're in the 20s with referrals, at least you're doing pretty good. You're
Yes.
making people happy. Okay.
Okay, the third level, they buy close to what's recommended, you know, they buy pretty good. They stay, that means they come back for hygiene and for their next problem that you found. And number three, they refer others with energy, with strength. They sell you to other people. And to do this, you have to actually perfect the whole path through the practice, from building relationships, getting them ready to hear about things they weren't expecting, showing the dentistry, creating the urgency, getting it all together and getting it smoothed out, getting staff that can spot when we're out of line. And I'll tell you, Wes, a lot of people had this. They had this working. Pandemic came, wiped it out. Now they have new staff with no sense of being too strong, too weak. They can't help the doctor calibrate.
Right, right. So level 3, that's what we're all trying to get to. How often do you see that type of practice? You know, if you saw 100 practices, how many are going to be?
I'm going to say 20. 20 might be, it's possible. You might have 20 to achieve that. Now, digital marketing has managed to bring in people with 5-star reviews. You know, people come in because of the 5-star review. And so a marketing patient tends to come in ready to buy almost as good as a referral patient, kind of devaluing the referral. They're not quite as precious as they were, you know. The reason you would want to really be strong with referrals is the wall it creates against competition.
Oh, right, right.
Because it can happen. You know, all of a sudden 5 doctors are dropped out of the sky on your city block that you compete with, and some of them are serious players.
So what are some things that you've observed in these offices that are at the pinnacle here? So maybe 20% of the offices kind of reach this level 3, but obviously there's the 1%ers, you know, the people that really have some kind of ability. What are some of the things you've observed in them that really sets them apart with everybody else?
Well, a doctor can't do it by himself. They really can't, without giving away treatment. They got to be so cheap or so random at giving away treatment that it doesn't work. So they got to have a team. The team builds the relationship. In fact, the relationship is with the team, and the doctor just kind of reinforces the relationship. The people feel so comfortable. They're so in control. People here are so aware of my needs and my fears. This is home. You can just feel their roots going down into the ground.
That is different. When you go to these offices, one thing you'll notice if you just sat there and you went to other offices that were doing okay, is the team has really got a culture in place of just awareness, like you're saying, of the patient and everything. That is one of the huge differences that we see. It's not, part of it's the doctor, obviously, that the doctor does make a difference. We could put a different doctor in there and they wouldn't do quite as well. Certainly we see that with associates. You could put an associate in that practice. It typically won't do as well as the owner doctor.
Can I just add one more thing that I see in a lot of the great offices? And that's a culture of graciousness. They treat people so good. They treat them like they're valued, whether they buy dentistry, whether they're too poor to buy dentistry, they treat them good. Whether they only have a half a dozen teeth, they treat them all with kindness. This was Roy Smith's great secret. He wouldn't let somebody stay in his practice if they treated people differently. He said his dad died with 6 teeth in his head, and he wouldn't have wanted somebody judging his father. That graciousness of, let me give you an example of the difference. Everybody can say, would you like a bottle of water? And everybody will respond with, no, that's right, thanks, I just had some. How many people go out into the waiting room and hand them a bottle of water and a mug full of toothbrushes or whatever? Just hand it to them, give it to them. That's being gracious. That's before you know they're buying anything. You've treated them with kindness, with an outreach. So many of those people refer people that buy huge cases. They come back later with money. In other words, those offices are really benefiting from that.
Can I give an example too, kind of off of just what you're saying, that I typically hear? Would you like a bottle of water? Or you kind of slow down, you say, could I get you a bottle of water? You know, where everything is slowed down, there's a lot more connection to their voice. It isn't just, would you like fries with that? Are you sure you wouldn't like fries with that? You know, it comes, you know, that everybody slows down a little bit. Speed and pace of an office and your team, you know, we can see it when we sit and observe. These offices that we're talking about, these 1% offices, that's one thing that they've got down. They know how to really slow down and communicate.
All these things tend to fade later in the day.
Yeah, yes.
People get tired.
Yeah.
They're less gracious.
Okay, next, what's the next thing you've observed?
They don't judge people. They show the dentistry and say, you know, we can start with this or that, but if I was in your position, here's what I would do. And they find a way to present a bigger case without having the impact of an overblown case.
Okay, let's dissect that a little bit. So,
okay, all right, they say, yeah, okay, this tooth here really needs some help. Now, if it was me, these other 3, I'd probably get them done at the same time I got numbed up, but we can take that really at your pace, you know, when you're ready to do those. In other words, and there's people that'll say, yeah, let's just get them all done. They get those people. The people that aren't good at making this style of presentation I'm talking about, they just get the one tooth.
Right, okay. So you can do a presentation that really gives your treatment coordinator something to work with in the end. In other words, when we sit down and talk with Greg, like, we can start with this one tooth. Let's talk about these other ones. Are you sure you don't want to get these done? So that they have a chance to even pull out a larger case.
You know what's a term I hear?
Without alienating the patient or making them feel like they need to buy it all. That's kind of the secret.
Something I hear you say sometimes to staff and doctors is mama bear porridge presentations, where you're not too hot, you're not too cold. I don't think people know the cost of being an extremist.
That's devastating.
Too low, you don't make a profit, you work yourself to death. Pretty soon you're underpaying staff and you're out of business.
Right.
Too strong and you don't have any patients to treat.
the practice certainly will not grow. Offices are too
Yeah.
strong. In the end, they can be too strong with perio, they can be too strong with treatment, but in the end, it comes across as too strong. I would say the vast majority of people, that's where they tend to naturally default at.
Wes, let's go a step farther because you're asking what we've seen. One of the things I've seen is that people in more really legitimately prosperous areas, that whole calibration has moved forward, meaning what it will take to alienate a patient is much greater.
Right.
And things like being good at helping the patient feel like it was their idea to buy, especially in cosmetic cases where it's about money, they'll go high and then discount. So that can change. Now, I've seen people like Gary Cameron, who says that in his practice, I see him on Facebook all the time now. I think he's retired or mostly retired. But when he saw somebody come in with a necktie, they thought he was from a regulatory agency.
Right.
In other words, he was a practice that was kind of a bread and butter practice, probably bread and margarine, not even bread and butter. And he got 6 working operatories for himself. He pulled teeth, he filled teeth, he did everything at an accelerated rate, and he met his market head on. And he did incredibly well, hundreds of thousands of dollars of production. And likewise, we have people in ritzy areas whose addresses you probably know. They're so famous, and the bar is higher. They can show more, and they don't suffer as fast for it. If I was a prosthodontist, that's where I'd go, because this idea of showing everybody a big case just hasn't worked.
No, yeah. Some of the things that I've noticed, and I know I've talked about this before, but is confidence. Just the presentation, especially when you get down to what I'm expecting you to do as a patient, is confidence. That's the one thing that really stands out between our doctors when we listen to them, is in the end, they kind of just tell it straight up, this is what you need to do.
I'd like to make a comment on that.
Okay.
I have worked with people who were so good at projecting confidence, they became the poster child for level 1 calibration. The people get the dentistry done, all of it, but they don't come back. They don't refer.
Yeah, you got to match up the case size. So you can't, the two got to go hand in hand. You could be uber confident and be talking about a full mouth restoration. That's not what I'm talking about. In other words, I can be super confident talking about $40,000 worth of dentistry, and you're still not going to get good results with that. The two got to go hand in hand. You got to do the mama bear porridge with confidence and how you present it. They all kind of got to work together. When we always say you got to speak with confidence, you got to get the right case size that fits this person's budget, or that can fit their budget, and then you got to get urgency built into the presentation. With that, if any one of those things is off kilter, you get nothing. Period. So you just pointed out that if you have super confidence but have the wrong case size, you get nothing. And if you have the opposite, you get nothing. If you have no urgency, you get nothing. The three together is what really makes it happen. And urgency in dentistry is quite simple. It's the consequences of not following through with treatment. And what's it really going to cost? What's really at stake? And the three together is where the magic is. And certainly the doctor's part of it. And that confidence is a big one that's missing in a lot of offices.
I'll just throw in one more. I've got some doctors who are incredibly skilled in presentation. They've got great staff. Don't ask me why, but they've bought into some kind of non-dental dentistry where they're showing patients something they didn't come in for. It's a high-end product. patients have never heard of it. It could have to do with gum treatment. It could have to do with alignment, any number of things. Patients have never heard of it. They came in from an ad or because of pain, and now you're talking about something completely unrelated to the purpose of their visit. Those people do have a tendency to go 10 for 10. 10 new patients, nobody buys.
I'll tell you, if you're listening to this and you listen to what we're saying here and you go, well, I don't think I struggle with confidence. I think I'm pretty confident in my, then probably the issue is what you're presenting, like what you're pointing out.
Could be, very
A
likely.
lot of times you're too aggressive. You're too confident. As
Yeah.
a person, you don't struggle with your own confidence and you tend to try to use it. And you get a lot of goose eggs that way.
You can really mess a patient up too. I had a dentist who treated me. When I went in, he said, oh, that tooth, yeah, I can tell you, when I see you again, we're going to do a root canal on that tooth. And I thought, okay, all right. When I came back in, he didn't do a root canal on the tooth. In other words, he didn't follow through with something. In other words, he was confident, made me feel good, and then left me floating in space like an untethered spaceman.
One of my biggest producers, I'm going to share insight on one of his, I guess, closing lines, which is similar to what your dentist told you. Is I, we were talking and I always say, I'd get this done as soon as you can. So I wouldn't wait on this. I'd get it done as soon as you can. Those are lines that I teach doctors all the time. And he said, you know what I say? I don't tell them as soon as you can. I say I wouldn't let this, I would get this taken care of by the end of the summer. So right now we're in the beginning of summer. He'd say, I'd make sure that this gets done before the end of summer. So it kind of gives them a little wiggle room. He's not overly aggressive, but he sets a window of about 3 months of when they need to get this done. And he's very confident himself. Obviously, but this guy is the biggest producer I know of, single doctor, doing $450 a month, $450,000 a month himself. When I'm telling you secret sauce, that was his thing. That's what he says to people.
I would add to that, Wes, just
Okay.
a thought. That might be, that particular approach might be called for, especially when the person didn't come in for that tooth. Maybe
Right.
that's something
Maybe
he
that's
found.
his secret, right? Maybe that's his secret.
You come in for a tooth, you do it right now.
It's subtle pressure. He's not jumping at it like, hey, let's open up this tooth right now. He's saying, look, I probably would get this done before the summer's out. And obviously he knows when it goes to the front desk, the treatment coordinator is trying to set it up to do it. Let's get this taken care of. It's going to be $1,800. The insurance going to cover $900. Okay, $800. And they try to schedule it. It's not like they're waiting 2 months to schedule it. But from the patient's point of view, the urgency's there. The doctor's communicating, you need to get this done, but he's not overly aggressive. It was an interesting technique.
Can I give you an example of overly aggressive?
Yeah.
Right. You find something and the person says, well, let me think it over. And you say, well, what do you want to think over? Let's talk about it. Well, I want to talk to my wife. Well, here's my cell phone. Give her a call. That is an assertive person stomping on somebody, and no, they're not going to come back, probably won't get the work done, and they'll unrefer to anybody they tell about you. You kind of need your staff's help to tell you if you're coming off too strong or too weak.
You've got to know absolutely where you're at in this zone, and a lot of staff will be nice and say, I think you're in the middle. I think you're in the middle. But if you're not getting the results that you're expecting in terms of the trifecta, where you're getting good case acceptance, they're staying in the practice, and they're going home and referring, there's something that could be improved. And
I've been surprised when I really get at the bottom of it, surprised how many owner doctors really kind of do come from a middle ground, and they're pretty good at that. And because they are there, that's who they are, or maybe they've learned that, they do tend to be in this group you're talking about, these superstars. They're kind of tuned in to not being too strong or too weak.
They're good producers, right? They're producing.
When we're too weak, we're confusing people. When we're too strong, they're feeling overrun. They're feeling controlled and dominated.
I'll tell you about some studies that I do with practices, and I do this over and over again, where we track case acceptance, and we have multiple doctors in the same office, and we're seeing how much dentistry they're presenting per new patient and seeing their closing rates. And let's take an office that we got 3 doctors in there, and new patient, it's about $1,000 a new patient is what they're producing, certainly that first month. Very consistent. And we'll get a new doctor that plugs into that office. When one doctor leaves, we'll get a new doctor come in. We'll follow the stats, and if that doctor comes in presenting $1,300, $1,400 on average instead of $1,000, their numbers will be not just slightly off. I mean, their numbers will be like next to nothing on case acceptance. They'll see 10 patients and only get 2 accepted. The difference between getting great case acceptance, this finicky little mama bear porridge, is within hundreds of dollars, not thousands. It's that narrow range that you got to be in with getting this mama bear porridge right.
It's funny you talk about this. In the legal world, closing arguments in a court of law for a settlement, some kind of injury, sometimes they go for tens of millions of dollars. They get nothing. They get zero.
Right.
They don't even get to cover their legal fees. In other words, finding this number is a bit of magic that isn't limited to dentistry. It's this number of what to ask for. You know, when people come in and ask for a job, or we're hiring, and they ask for too much money, we know right off the bat, that's not going to work.
Right.
So this is a big thing.
Another thing I've noticed, Craig, about these big producers is the treatment coordinator themselves. They tend to have a couple or one, at least one, maybe 2, that are pretty darn good. They don't, obviously we've seen people that are unbelievable, but they typically have somebody who's pretty darn good. These are people that have a sales aptitude, meaning they like this encounter. They like talking money. They like talking treatment and talking about finances with patients. It's no problem. They actually enjoy it. But they also have a decent amount of empathy, meaning they really do care about people. It's not about the money. They really do care, and it comes across in them. They're very genuine people. When you get that person in that role of treatment coordinator, it's noticeable to any practice. And I will say I do notice that these big producers tend to have.
I suspect some dentists that are not that great at it win if they have this outstanding treatment coordinator.
Yeah, you can literally, and we've seen it, where somebody has left one office, the office was doing great, goes to a different office. It was our office as well, you know, and that office blows up, this office shrinks down. It can make a huge difference having a great treatment coordinator, definitely. Anything else that you've observed between, you know,
Not really, not right off the top of my head, but I would say to try to examine yourself. Don't just say, oh, I'm doing all of that. Are you really getting the, you know, like we were talking to somebody the other day, Wes, you're getting 50% success. Should be 80 or 85, 90. Are you getting
no clue? And he had no clue until he actually tracked it. He thought he was doing pretty good.
Are people buying? Are they coming back? Like you said, for hygiene, are they referring? And you know, if they're not, we need to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. If the practice is not really screaming, I'm growing, we're growing, the practice is moving forward, packed, patients are stacked out, you're not getting this phenomenon. You're in this kind of middle zone. If you're in level 3, you would know it. And if you want to get there, yeah, you should jump on the phone, talk to us about it. We're willing to obviously talk to anybody that's listening to this. As before, if you've listened before, all we ask is that you leave us a Google review at the end of our session. We'll spend 45 minutes with you and try to answer this, try to dig in and figure out what you might be missing and try to point you in the right direction.
Wes, in 2009, we saw case acceptance just pancake because
Yeah.
of recession, real estate. There's a lot of talk now about that being right around the corner. So you want to become a master of this level 3 case presentation. Give us
Yeah.
a call.
Yeah, give us a call. You can click a link and just jump on our schedule. And like I said, all we ask in return is that you leave us a Google review.
Thank you.
Talk to you. Okay, thank you.